For the second quarter of the 2022-23 crime stats have revealed a worrying trend. Contact crime, which includes murder, sexual assault, attempted murder, and armed robbery, has increased by 18.5%. 10,000 rape cases were also opened between July and September this year. So let's discuss these staggering figures with crime analyst Dr. Kock, as well as the executive director and founder of the GBV Monitor. That's Omogolo Taunyane Mnguni. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time. It's great to have you on the program. Dr. Kock, let me start with your thoughts. You know, already some people who are working in this space are calling for some kind of rejigged strategic approach. In fact, they're calling on the police minister to completely change his strategy around how we fight crime. But do we know what that looks like?
Yeah, you know, I hear all these stories, but, you know, we must be careful not to try and invent the wheel again. If we look at the history for the last 20 years, from 2002 to 2011-12, and I sound like a gramophone, you know, the fact of the matter, in that 10 years, we had very significant decreases in a trend like murder, which is the most reliable crime trend. We decreased murders from 24,000 roughly to about 15,000 roughly in that 10 years. Then suddenly, 11-12, there came a turnaround, and now the murders were escalating. And we must ask our question, why did the murders escalate? Why did it decrease in the previous 10 years? And then now suddenly we increase in the last 10 years and in the last 2 years, the year before this year and now this 2 quarters that we already have, we increase with a double digit. If we don't wake up, this will just increase further. The problem is we must go back to the basics, and the back to the basics is visible policing based on intelligence, on information, and also a very, very strong triangle between the police, security companies, and the community structures that deals with policing. And that's an old strategy. It's not a new strategy.
That's interesting. Omogolo, interestingly enough, there are also people who are saying that these numbers don't actually accurately represent police performance. If we want to check that, we should rather look at things like DNA backlogs, how dockets are collected, how evidence is being treated, etc., etc. But even on that score, at least if the work that you do is anything to go by, police are also found to be in want.
Indeed. Good morning to your listeners, and hello again to you, Ayanda. You know, there really is no need to reinvent the wheel, right? And when we are talking about underreporting, we recognize that these numbers that have now been reported by SAPS, the 10,000 rapes that have been reported, are only a tip of the iceberg. We know that we have high underreporting because of the secondary victimization, because of lack of trust in the criminal justice system. We just don't have an actual depiction, the real depiction of what is happening on the ground. When you're speaking about the DNA backlog, we heard Minister Cele talking about how the numbers have now gone significantly down because they're now making progress. But what we need to be asking the minister, particularly about this DNA backlog, is when are we going to get to a point where we close that gap? That's where we should be looking towards. And that DNA backlog does give us a depiction of exactly how inaccessible justice is and exactly how slow the wheels of justice turn.
Yeah. You know, I want to just go back to one of the points that you made, Dr. Kock, around increasing police visibility and going back to the basics. Ironically, part of the more grotesque crimes we've seen in this country in the weeks gone by is around vendors in parts of Gauteng who were shot brazenly because of an exchange, and it's quite a long story, but essentially some witnesses who were present at that time said moments before that shooting took place, a police van actually passed by that crime area and seemingly didn't do much, you know. So it's one thing for police to be there. It's another for them to be effective in their presence.
Yeah. But when I refer to visibility, I don't only mean that you should, be there and drive past a situation which you can easily see that this this may lead to some problem, you will have to be actively interpreting your surroundings and see that the problem can arise here. So visibility is very, very focused. It is very much based on information that you're at the right place at the right time. But then even a thing like that can happen. I mean, it's just how things work. But I can tell you, I looked at stations where high visibility, where the old recipe is still applied, the old strategy is still applied. And it clearly pays off. While where people don't worry, the police don't bother, they just drive up and down or they sit at the station, there clearly crimes like murder and attempted murder and your robberies are very high. I just want to link on the issue of rape and assault, GBV violence, domestic violence. That's a very big generator also of our murders.
Yeah.
And we have heard the minister referring to arguments. And unfortunately, it is a very difficult thing to prevent. It's very difficult to prevent. But when we come to, there's something that the minister and everybody, it seems, try to ignore. And that is the mass of people, poor people in poor areas, moving from work to home and home to work during the darkness of the day, and they use mass transport. And as they are walking towards their shack for a kilometer, somebody robs them. Street robbery. The police stats doesn't even contain street robbery. I had to calculate it. Every time that they release it, I have to calculate. Now, there was a 30% increase in street robbery. People get killed during the street robbery, and the community react with vigilantism. More people get killed. We can cut our murder with at least 30% by addressing that one issue with visibility.
Fascinating. And, I guess in that context, Omogolo, we also need to start asking real questions around how we clamp down on the issues around domestic violence, because they happen, as the name suggests, within homes. In the past, for instance, government has been accused of needing to be careful not to essentially tell people how to run their houses. But when things go wrong in this way, it's also government that's called to account. So how do we, I suppose, balance those two things?
Very difficult point that you're bringing up. I mean, the stats already tell us the number one place of occurrence where assault, GBH, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, rape, these occur in the private residences, places that are known to the victim and the perpetrator. So it is a very intimate space, a very difficult space that you could try to intervene or to try to regulate. But on the flip side of that, it is an opportunity for us to really start looking at the data and saying, how do we intervene? In what ways do we intervene? And this really boils down to programs that the government should be investing in, where we're focusing a lot on social behavioral change, having programs that target perpetrators and not targeting the women in our campaigns, targeting men, targeting young boys, really bringing into focus the importance of respect for bodily autonomy, bodily integrity, boundaries that should not be crossed, what is right, what is wrong. I think in a lot of instances, we really do talk about rape now when the crime stats come up, now when the 16 days campaign comes up. But what we need to be doing more of is really educating and having awareness programs for both men and women to really say this is where lines are crossed and where they shouldn't be crossed, and when they are crossed, what it is that victims and survivors should and can do.
Yeah, speaking about that, in fact, as you're speaking now, I'm reminded of Sonia Mbele's statement. I'm not sure if you came across it. Sonia Mbele's son being accused of essentially domestic violence, and her statement had so much to take from it. For one, she doesn't appear to justify the behavior at all. She is unequivocal in her support of the victim and is calling for the law to take its course. There's the statement now on your screen. There's going to be a lot, of course, said about this particular incident, but one hopes that there's a whole lot more said about what we could learn about how to respond to when domestic violence is in our homes, especially if we find ourselves in a position of power and influence.
You know, it's very laudable what Sonia Mbele has done, really taking accountability, even though she's not the perpetrator, but really calling out this poor behavior by her son and saying, let's allow the law to take its course. But on the flip side, when we speak about allowing the law to take its course, we must also recognize that we have a high attrition rate. We have a law that takes very long to, bring outcomes that are positive for survivors. We know we have an 8% of reported incidents of GBV, secure convictions, right? So when we look at all these numbers and all these issues that are reported, we know that only 8% of them will give a positive outcome in favor of victims. So we need to start talking about what is it that lies in the middle? What kind of justice or alternative justice should we starting to imagine while we're looking at this issue and waiting for the law to really take its course? That is the conversation that we need to start having. Those are the solutions that we need to start talking about, exploring, implementing, experimenting with, to see that we can really make this justice more accessible, ensure that rights are recognized and protected in the manner that our constitution already stipulates.
Yeah. Speaking about solutions, Dr. de Kock, one certainly gets the impression that there are no quick fixes, and it's difficult to speak about crime in this country without also reflecting on our socio-economic conditions. In many instances, there are experts who are saying it will become almost impossible to solve issues without solving the country's socio-economic conditions, because some of the perpetrators, and this is not a justification at all, are pushed to crime, which may turn violent, because of their background, because of things like poverty.
That's true. The socio-economic problems are there, and it will take years to solve, and that also generate crime. That I agree with. I also agree with the issue that our culture, our background, our history, and our our culture of male domination and things like that also have an influence. But I tell you, there is one small little quick fix. And we have seen it for 10 years, it worked, and we should just apply that. And that is the quick fix of addressing organized crime, of addressing robberies. If we address robberies and the reaction on the robberies, and we address organized crime, we can make a significant inroad into our crime, and the picture would not look as bleak as it looks now. And if we continue like this, we are in for a big problem.
On that sobering note, Dr. Chris de Kock is a crime analyst, also joining us there, Omogolo Taunyane Mnguni, who's Executive Director and Founder of GBV Monitor. To both our guests, thanks for your time.